All right, let's talk about landlordism. So the difficulty with talking about landlordism is, all right, I want everyone in chat, everyone who's watching, or on the second channel, Germinal, I want everyone to put their little thinking caps, and we're seeing it as we're gonna attack this subject as a um, social problem, not as an individual problem. We're looking at the system itself. We're thinking about it in terms of its systemic implications, its systemic ramifications, its consequences, and we're not looking at it in terms of individuality. All right, everybody, put your little thinking caps on. We're looking at it systemically. We're looking at it in a very smart way, and not in a, well, my landlord is actually a really nice guy who only owns one building and he's doing it as like a side hustle. All right, we're looking at it systemically. The reason why I want to look at it systemically is because for many issues, if we want to understand them, we have to understand their broader utility and their broader uh, consequences on the way we live. And if we look at it only in terms of individuals, we miss the forest from the trees, if that's the right way to use that term. So, and one of the reasons why I want to talk about it in a systemic way as well is because it's kind of inevitable if you want to critique or criticize landlordism, is you have to look at it systemically. But looking at it systemically comes with challenges. My personal criticism of landlordism comes directly from my criticism of private property. However, I don't want to attack it through that lens of private property, because I feel like if someone understands the criticism of private property, they will either be a socialist or they already have like their minds made up about the whole idea of landlordism. So I think you can't attack it through the lens of private property, and that might be for another discussion. And it's a very difficult discussion, and it's a very important one, but maybe not for attacking landlordism. And the reason why is because I think private property is at the roots of a lot of issues systemically. And I think, for example, if you want to criticize cops or the institution of cops, you do it through private property, at least for me. But at the same time, if you are too theoretical about it, people will not accept your criticism of cops through private property. They don't see that relationship. And I think there's other ways of criticizing cops, the same way there's other ways of criticizing landlordism. And the way I want to criticize it is through its inherent contradiction with the whole idea of meritocracy. So the whole idea of meritocracy is that when you do labor, and if you work hard enough, you are compensated for that labor and you merit it. It's like in French, mériter means you deserve it. So the whole idea is if you work hard enough, you deserve the fruits of the labor that you do. The whole idea, though, the whole criticism of meritocracy is that's not actually how it happens, how it works in real life. It's great on paper, but not actually good in real life. Probably heard of that. Maybe not about meritocracy, but for meritocracy, it's perfect for that. And all that being said, if you look at labor that deserves to be remunerated, a lot of jobs fit in that category. But landlord is not a job, in the sense that a lot of people would argue that you don't deserve the money that you're making because you're not actually contributing or actually doing labor. I'm already hearing all the criticisms of my criticism, all the answers, and it's like, well, landlords, they can fix up the plumbing or whatever, and that is true. But landlords who fix up the plumbing are doing the job of a plumber. They're not doing a landlord's job, and you can give them money as a plumber, but you can't give them money as a landlord. And let me guess, your landlord who's taking care of the plumbing is not being paid the salary of a plumber. If he does 2 hours of plumbing in 3 or 4 months, he's making a lot more money in the end as than a plumber is. So he's not being paid to fix up your apartment. He's being paid for being a landlord. And what does it mean to be paid for being a landlord? Well, if we take that idea of meritocracy again, income comes from labor, or from the idea that you deserve it. At least that's how we see it. If you work hard enough, you can make money. But landlordism, or becoming a landlord, is very openly passive income. And what is passive income if not just accepting the idea that you're not doing much and you're making money out of not doing much? And a lot of people would call this idea of passive income, especially through landlordism, as something that is parasitic, because you're not doing anything and you're able to make money from it. There you go. People are saying they're leeches. And Past Human is right. Landlords usually employ maintenance workers. And that's something, because I've got stats, and we're going to go over those stats, and we're going to try to attack the criticism of landlordism through those statistics, which are, by the way, provided by a service that benefits landlords. I think Barnes Nest says, "Do you disagree with passive income altogether?" It depends. I think there are ways of passive income being fine in terms of, like, let's say copyright. Yeah, let's say you write a book, right? And you write that book and it sells, and you get like money from it. It's passive in the sense that you don't do anything with that book anymore, but all the prior work for making that book is now being paid, and it's also funding your next way to do a book. But that investment is done with labor and not necessarily with money. I think passive income can be very destructive, or can be, my criticism of it is that it's money that generates more money, and you do it without having even to put your hands on. And the reason why that's bad, or why my criticism of it is that it's like particularly bad, is that if people who have money can make more money by having money, then it creates that split, or that creates that class divide. Even, like, it makes for a more unfair society. And landlordism is a way for people who have money and who are making money by having money take money from people who don't have enough money to make money with money. In a way. And my idea, like, I want to preface this also by saying, we're in the middle of the segment, but I want to say that I don't like the institution of landlords, but I know a lot of people don't like that, but I prefer having a leftist landlord than a conservative landlord. I don't like the idea of people being incredibly rich, but I'd rather have a leftist billionaire than a right-wing conservative billionaire. For harm reduction, and I think we can criticize the system and not necessarily because landlordism is not leaving anytime soon, and I think having these discussions is more productive than actually criticizing people for being landlords. Anyway, just understanding that landlordism is bad, I feel like it's closer to the end goal than to shame people in being landlordism. Because if you shame people into being landlords, what you're going to have is more shameless landlords. Anyway, all that to say, yeah, Tim Harris says, can a leftist be a landlord? I think so. I think a leftist can be a landlord. Like the same way I think a cop can be a leftist can be a cop. We all work within institutions that are inherently bad, and I feel like if a landlord, because I think there can be good landlords in the sense that they're better than the others. The institution itself is problematic. It's exploitative. But the same way, I think a business owner can also be a leftist. Engels was a leftist. But all that to say, let's go back to landlordism. But the whole idea of merit, we were talking about the idea of merit and the whole passive income. So the whole idea of passive income actually curbs the whole idea that landlords actually do something. And most landlords, at least in the US, and we'll see that with the stats, are actually big firms. So they're making money without actually having to intervene or actually having to do any work. So that idea that landlords actually have to work is at least to me, though they might have to work, they're still making a profit, because if it wasn't worth it for them, they wouldn't be doing it. And I think if we want to systemically criticize landlordism, instead of going through private property or criticism of private property, as I was inferring earlier, what we can do is explaining how landlords are not actually doing anything in the first case. And if they are, they're not being remunerated for the thing that they're doing. They're being remunerated for the property that they're holding. And second, I think that we can speak to people by saying that you're basically, what you're doing is you're paying rent to a landlord. If you're a tenant, you are paying rent to a landlord. What you're doing by paying rent to a landlord is you're paying their mortgage. So you are spending, let's say you're in a place for 5 years. All that money that you're spending in your mortgage or in your rent, you're not going to see anymore. You're basically giving it to a landlord. That landlord is using it to pay their mortgage. And the difference here is that once you're gone and once that mortgage is paid, the landlord can sell his property at full price and cash in all that money. And what you're doing is you're basically accumulating the wealth of that landlord for him by giving him what I would call a tax. What he's doing is taxing you, or what they're doing is taxing you. And the reason why it's bad, or if it's even worse, is that there is no alternative. And that's one of the big reasons why landlordism is bad. Because, for example, if you go to a motel, I wouldn't be against the whole idea of motels or hotels or bed and breakfasts or whatever, because those actually give you a service, and it's not actually to live there. You're doing it as a way of, usually it'd be like a maximum a week or two. I don't know. I haven't been in a hotel or motel in a very long time. But that, I'm not necessarily against that idea. But when you live there, that's when it becomes more exploitative, because there is no alternative. You either go back to your parents or sleep at a friend, which is not possible for a lot of people. And actually the only alternative is being homeless. And being homeless is illegal, practically, and it's also not something that we should, it shouldn't be an alternative. So because of that, even the state recognizes that being homeless is illegal, and heavily discouraged by all our systemic infrastructure. We have to agree that our standards for housing need to be elevated, and the consequences of having housing so necessary makes it so that there's a leeway for exploitation. There's a leeway for exploitation for anything, I believe, that is necessary. Food, for example. Let's say food was really, really expensive. That's what we call an inelastic demand. If food is really expensive, what are you going to do, right? You can grow some potatoes in your backyard, but eventually you'll need some more. You'll need more than that. And if food becomes increasingly expensive, then what are you going to do? It's either you starve or you just give more money to your grocery store or to whatever supplier. And that's an elastic demand, and it leaves room to exploitation. For food, it hasn't been done yet. It's coming. But for rent, we're seeing it being done more and more. Rent is increasing, and what can we do about it? can't do anything. And that's one of the reasons why landlordism is exploitative. And I feel like I've made my case for systemic criticism, at least in terms of without taking private property. But one thing I'd like to do is go over. Hold on, because I think that it's a pretty simple criticism, and I feel like it needs to be simple in order to understand it. And I want to go over these statistics to understand landlordism and to understand also the consequences of such a system. So we have here 35 insightful landlord statistics, 2023, and it's made by Flex, which is a company that is, and what they do is create a way for landlords to get paid. So for property managers, as you can see here. So if they were to be biased, they'd be biased in wanting to have more landlords because that's how they make money. That's their whole business model. So there's like a lot of points, and we're not gonna go over them all, because there's 35 of them. But I want to go over the ones that are important for the point I'm making. And some are not important for the point I'm making, but they don't necessarily go against the whole system. Like, for example, the whole mom and pop's landlord kind of defense. In terms of systemic, it doesn't address a systemic. It's just taking individual. It's like if you're criticizing police in general, and someone says, "Well, I know this guy, and he's a policeman. He's really, really nice." Anyway, so we're again systemic thinking cap. So the first one is 10.6 million Americans earn income from rental properties, which is all right, fine. Landlords have an average income of $97,000 a year, which is absolutely insane. It's, I believe, more than double than what usually tenants make, and that's a lot of money. A lot of money to, and it supports the idea of it's like a kind of a passive income. You need a lot of money to become a landlord, and when you're a landlord, you make more money. It creates this class divide even more. Mom and pop landlords own 20.5 million rental units. All right, that's fine. The average landlord has 3 properties, which is good to know. We'll actually read the thing. On average, landlords have 3 properties to their name. The value of those properties isn't necessarily through the roof. 40% of landlords own less than $200,000 worth of property. In addition, 30% fall in the 200 to 400K range. Only 30% of landlords own property worth $400,000 and more, with 7% at the top owning properties worth $1 million. It's also important to think that even if it's just 7%, in terms of 7% out of 10.6 million is still a lot of people who are owning properties worth than 1 million. But again, I don't feel like this is, well, the average landlord has 3 properties can be problematic in the sense that a median would be more representative of the average landlord, because there is what you call, I don't remember the name, but like those financial institutions that all they do is, it's like a landlords plus or super landlords. And there you go. Half of all landlords manage their own properties. 45% of landlords manage their own properties. That means that 55% of them actually don't. So the whole idea that landlords actually have to manage and do, and like that's why they're paid for what they're doing, is, at least in the case of 55%, which is a majority, not the case. Yeah, they hire someone, and it would make sense if you're making like 100K or over in a lot of cases, and that's just the average. A lot of people are a lot more wealthy than that. If you have that much money, you don't want to spend your time, managing your properties, especially if you have a lot. If you have, 6, 7, 8, sometimes it's hundreds of doors. There you go. Here, 25.8 million rental units are owned by businesses or partnerships. That's more than mom and pop. And that's a lot. And these businesses and partnerships are not managing it on their own. They're not. You're just a way for them to make more money. They're profiting off of your need to have a place to stay, and from the shortage of places to stay for you to, to actually go to. 25.8 rental units are owned by some kind of business entity. 25.8 million rental units. And I've been in one of those buildings, and you will never see the owner or owners, and they don't need to see you. Everything is run by managers, run by janitors, and that's what landlordism is basically designed to be, a passive income where you make people work, and basically they make profits off of this whole business. Real estate investment trusts. That's what I meant by those big corporations. 115,000 rental units. Investor home purchases plummet more than 30% in Q3. I imagine that's a good thing. Because one of the issues of landlordism, we're coming through a lot of those. The whole idea is a lot of people who see houses as an investment are more willing to put their money, because they have more money because they can invest in a house. So what happens is it rises the prices of houses in general, because they're willing to pay not to live in it. So they're not seeing it as an expense, but they're seeing it as a revenue. So if between myself and a landlord, let's say I'm someone who's looking to buy a house, and I have enough money for a down payment, just enough money, blah blah blah. And this other guy, and I want that house to be able to, now I'll see it as an expense, obviously, but that guy right next to me, who's a landlord who's going to make money off of it, doesn't see it as an expense. He sees it as revenue. So, and he has a lot more money on hand to either pay more for the house if he thinks he can make more money off of it. But I'm not thinking in terms of making money. I can't make money if I live there. But he's making money off of it, so he can pay more. So what's going to happen in terms of like when the house market is restricted or limited, that guy's going to buy it because he has more money, and he has more connections with the financial institutions because his investment is more secure than mine. Obviously, he can pay it back, or he can pay back his loan, let's say, faster, where I can't. And that guy, what he's going to do, he's going to pay that house. He's going to buy that house. And what am I going to do? Well, if I'm strapped with money, if I can't find anything, well, I'm going to go to the house he bought and pay his mortgage for him, and maybe a little bit more, so he can pay for a janitor, or maybe not a janitor for a house, but pay for the expenses. And in 25 years, once the mortgage is paid, that guy can sell it. He hasn't paid a single cent in mortgage, and he'll, if let's say he can sell the house for $300,000, he's getting that $300,000 in his pocket. I get nothing, because all the money that I've invested in renting was actually his mortgage. So I'm out of there in 25 years with nothing. He's out of there in 25 years without doing anything, because I'm paying his mortgage, and he's good. And I hope by giving those situations, we see the exploitative nature of this system. Half of single property landlords purchase the property as a primary residence, and that's the whole idea of mom and pops, like, buying that house without actually seeing it as an investment necessarily, or as a way of making profits off of it. So that's not necessarily a systemic critique that many people will see. Rents increased more than 24% on average between 2021 and 2022, which to these guys is a good thing. That means, your return on investment is going to be even higher. That's a really good thing. But for people who are trying to live, and for humans who are not soulless ghouls such as landlords, that's not a good thing. The fact that it increased more than 24% on average is terrible for everyone except for landlords. And that's just a way for them to make more money off of your hard-earned work. And if you're a conservative, what is a tax if not that, right? They're making money just from the fact that they own the place, not from actually giving you a service or anything. They just have the paper to own it. That's a tax. They have no other right to that money aside from saying, if you don't have that money, you can be, you can basically, the alternative is to be on the street. There's a form of coercion there, and that coercion is basically taxes. Landlords have raised rent rates an average of 31% since 2010. To them, again, it's a good thing. To average people, it's not. And I hope that through that, you can see also the class antagonism. They have different interests than you. During the last decade, rent increases outpaced wage inflation by 270%, which again to them is a good thing. That means that it's a good investment to make, which it is. It is a good investment, but that just shows that it's a good investment to do. 48% of landlords have asked a tenant to leave early. I don't know if anyone has had that experience. It's a really shitty experience to have. If you live in a house, if you live in a place that you have made your home and you're asked to leave, right? That's another way landlordism is bad. Because if you own your house, or if you have a right to your house or to your place, then that place is yours and you can call it home. But you always have, and here you have 50% of landlords have asked tenants to leave early. That means their tenants live in this precarious situation where they don't know if that house or that home can be theirs in a way. And that's a really, really bad situation to be in. And it's one that is exacerbated and enabled by landlordism. The idea that people can't even feel home in their home because it's someone else's. And that someone else doesn't see you as a human, but as a way to make profit. And if you're not making them profit, they have no incentives to keep you. None at all. And this is evicting a tenant may cost a landlord up to $10,000. Says here can be low to 3,500, which is often a thing that landlords will say, like, oh, like if a tenant is a bad tenant, then I can't, they're going to ruin my house and I can't even evict them. And I have a hard time tackling that idea, aside from this, the fact of saying, well, yeah, maybe we shouldn't, maybe landlordism is a bad idea. If it's so hard for you to be a landlord because you're not allowed to put people on the street, if it's so hard for you to be a landlord because you can't evict bad tenants, right? Then maybe landlordism is not a good idea to begin with. Not at all. The whole rent debt in the United States, $15 billion in rent debt. That's a lot of debt. And yeah, no. Paid. Now they're getting paid kind of points, which is what they do. Individual landlords collect $34,000 a year on average and pay $23,000 in expenses. I wonder if they include expenses, their mortgage as an expense. If they do, they're making a lot of profit, which is insane. Making $10,000 a year by not doing anything. And in these expenses, let's say there's a plumbing, you can actually pay a plumber for these expenses, right? If there's an electricity or whatever, you can pay a plumber for, or you can pay whatever handyman or a janitor for these inside these expenses. If that's including that, you're making a lot of money, again, for just holding the right to that property and being able to tell someone that this is mine, and if you don't comply to, or if you don't pay me, you're out. Also, expenses are deductible, tax deductible. That leads to a profit of just $10,000 per year, a profit margin of just 30%, 30.8%. For not doing anything, $10,000 a year. And not only are you not doing anything and you're making that money, $10,000 per year, but once you want to sell that house, you're getting money from just its increase in value. So you're not like I doubt that they're also calculating the rise in value of the house that they've purchased and that they're also benefiting from. But they won't say that they're making a lot of money, because if they do, then people might actually criticize landlordism and their parasitic. Another thing, approximately 6% of rental properties are unoccupied. If to you it's worth it to wait for the housing market to be more to make you more money, it might be, in some cases, it might be better to have an apartment that's empty than an apartment that has tenants in it. Which a lot of people criticize, because when you have people who are homeless saying, well, I'd rather wait before like housing people, because I want to house people with more profits in mind. And anyway, I wouldn't want someone who's homeless to be in my apartment. So I'll just wait for the right person and leave, people basically living in miserable conditions on the street, because that's not a good return on my investment. Oh, they talk about the property values right after the point there. There you go. Screen 2 applicants. Only 89% of landlords cover property repair costs. So if you have 11% of landlords, which is a lot of landlords, keep in mind. That's more than 1 in 10. And on, 40 million landlords, 10% of them, which is 4 million landlords, don't pay the property repair costs. If something breaks, if your sink breaks, if your plumbing breaks, you pay it. If not, good luck doing your dishes. Landlords handle 6 repair calls a year from tenants about property repairs. That might be true, and again, but I don't think it's landlords who handle them, because we already established that 50% of landlords are actually businesses, and it's not the landlords who actually take care of it, it's janitors. I don't know if they handle it or they just call their janitors to take care of it. 13% of landlords changed light bulbs for their tenants. Remember when I said that there's some good landlords? They change their tenants' light bulbs. Talk about being a good landlord. Those are the 13% leftist landlords I was talking about. I have a hard time believing that. Landlords with up to 4 units average $383 to $450 in expenses per unit per month. That has to be including mortgage. Let's see. If anyone owns a place at all, or they own a condo or a house, whatever, you don't, and that's not even a house, that's for a unit. You don't spend $400 per month in unless maybe heating is paid, is electricity paid? I don't know. But for a unit, I feel like that's a lot, and that might be just landlords taking out their tiny violins to justify their exploitation. 2/3 of landlords are college grads. Yeah. Rich people get richer. Rent payments on the first, accept personal checks. I don't care. 41% of properties experience some form of vacancy every year. Criminal background checks, credit checks, credit checks. 30% of individual investor landlord households are low to moderate income, because 90,000, $90,000 is, I guess it's moderate. I wouldn't call it low though. Among landlords, households earning less than $50,000, rental income represents 20% of earnings. So guys, landlordism does take some people out of poverty, all right? Bottom line, all right, don't read this. Bottom line is landlordism as we see, and I hope this helped to actually see how bad it is or how parasitic it is and how they see it as a way of making profits. Oh, by the way, Okan Aslan, thank you for becoming a member. You're like the third member on this channel. Thank you. I've never really pushed memberships or whatever, but thank you. It's really appreciated. Any support is extremely appreciated. Thank you. But yeah, no, it's parasitic, and I hope that if you're ever put into the situation of being a tenant, I want you to, and most of you already know, but I'm talking about people who might not even know or even conceive of landlordism in that way. But I want you to understand that you're paying your landlord's mortgage, and your landlord is profiting off that mortgage. And not only is he profiting off that mortgage that you're paying, he's also getting profit from you paying your mortgage and a little bit more than that. And if you want to buy a house, good luck, because you got to save up for your down payment, but it's very hard to save up for a down payment if a lot of your money every month is siphoned by the landlord. And on top of that, if we're not even considering the down payment, people ask, like the banks ask for a very, let's say a yearly income, and they'll say, all right, here are all the expenses associated to owning a house. Can you pay for that? And they'll decide if you can pay for that or not. And through that, well, you realize that actually being a tenant is more expensive than owning a house in terms of making monthly payments. That includes insurance, heating, electricity. It might be more expensive to actually be a tenant, and that makes sense, because if it was more expensive to be an owner than a tenant, then tenants wouldn't be making money for the landlords. So you need, in a way, to give profits to your landlords. You need to pay more than the minimum that it costs to be a tenant to make your landlord profit. So all that to say, it's a very exploitative system, and you need to be able to see that if you're if you're in the situation of being a tenant. And if you're not in the situation of being a tenant, at least try to imagine it. Try to imagine it. It's very it's not that hard to imagine being a tenant. I'm saying that as someone who was a tenant for a while, so it's like, I think it's not that hard. And it's not hard to conceive of you just paying someone else's mortgage, which, for those who don't know what a mortgage is, you're paying for someone else's house in a way. They take out a loan to buy a house, and you're paying that loan for them. And while you're paying that loan for them, you're also paying them. So not only do they have that house paid for them by you, they're also getting a bit of pocket money, because you need to stay a place and they own the places. And Anthony says, how do you think we can remove landlords without imposing additional labor and time on the renters? Like how we can remove landlords? There's ways of removing landlords, and one that's very popular. The whole idea is decommodifying housing, and decommodifying housing just means houses are no more a commodity, something to be sold and to be resold, to be added value to. It's a basic human necessity, and giving it a price tag has really bad repercussions on our way of living. And a lot of people's a big part of their paychecks is actually spent just to live somewhere, which doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be that way. And it's not like landlords are actually adding any value to anything. We can think abstractly if we're like, all right, there's enough houses for everyone, we just need to distribute them. everybody gets a house for free, and you don't have any mortgage, and everybody has like a lot of disposable income, even more, or they can work a lot less. I think everybody wins in that circumstance. Now, how do you distribute those houses? Where do you? That's a whole thing. Another way of making it easier, or at least to make it like in a transitional period, is by nationalizing housing. For those who don't know what nationalizing is, I'll give you an example. Here, electricity or power in general was nationalized by the government. So now the electricity is the responsibility of the government, and all the profits generated from electricity or power go to the government as a form of income for the government, which they can distribute to the population either through social services or tax credits. And that, I believe, is, even though as an anarchist I'm very how do I say, skeptical of the state, I believe that this can be, at least in a, for now, the easiest way of seeing how housing can be decommodified would be through nationalizing housing. And rent, for example, in electricity, in Quebec, we have some of the lowest electricity costs in the country. Not mostly because of our infrastructure, but also because, well, the state decides how much money we're making, and the state's main goal is not to make profit or make a buck out of our need to heat ourselves and not, freeze in the winter, but they do it because that's sustaining society, right? And I can see the case being made for housing as well. Housing can be a lot cheaper if taken in by the government because they're not trying to make a profit off of it. And also they don't have to pay mortgages, or they don't have to, all of these things that come with it. Basically what I'm saying, imagine this one big business that has like, 10,000 rental units, and they have managers, they have janitors, and those people do all the businesses, all the organizational work. And the big business, instead of being someone who is doing it all for profit, is traded in for the government. And then you can have laws to make it less expensive, and control rent costs and things like that. Anthony says, I like the idea, but also, how do we convince investors to spend time and money on building on a property without that incentive? I live in NYC. My apartment building wouldn't exist without money incentive. Yeah, I think the government can do it. In a completely decommodified world, in our beloved anarchist society, I think people would be building houses if there was a need for them to house people who don't have a place to stay. Now we need financial investment, because if we don't make money off people not being in the streets, then there's no reason for doing it, right? So in that case, if we live in a world where there needs to be reasons to house people, then I think that the government should be in charge of those reasons, instead of giving money to people for doing it, so that they can make profit off of it. Moonchow Signification says, your landlord isn't the one fixing themselves. We saw in the previous, when we looked over the when we looked over the how do you call it, the statistics, that no, a majority of landlords, at least in the United States, don't fix themselves. My landlord do most of the repairs and maintenance himself. I guess that makes it overall cheaper. Yeah, and that is true. It makes it cheaper for the landlord. That's so that he can make more of a profit off of your conditions. And often, landlords don't actually make that much great repairs. They'll we've seen those memes of landlord repairs, right? Or landlord paint jobs. They do it cheap because they don't care about how you live. They care about getting money from you. And again, we're having the systemic cap here. We're thinking we're taking a systemic lens. My landlord helps me out. My landlord, when he sees me, takes the groceries and grocery bags and helps me bring them in. Could be a really good guy, but it doesn't say much about landlordism. Yeah, and nobody's right in this case. It says when people have a place to live and aren't in survival mode, they are more likely to contribute to the well-being of others. Absolutely. And they might be freed up to actually, like, let's say you don't have to give a quarter of your income to just house yourself. And a quarter is generous. Like most people spend more than a quarter of their income to just house themselves. In that case, they can either reduce their hours at jobs that they don't like, so that they can actually do what they want and contribute to society in a way that they find most suiting for their abilities. But it can also give them more money to actually, invest in other places, or invest in their own house, right? Let's say 30% of the income that you usually put into actually paying the house to someone else, you actually invest it in the house in itself to improve it, to improve its insulation, to make it, anyway, I feel like there's yeah, Munchausification says, I'm very fortunate to have a great landlord, but most doesn't, I guess, yeah. But it's not even about having a great landlord or not, to be honest. Um, when I lived in a big corporate, I don't know how to call them. The name was there earlier. I don't remember how to call them, but like a corporate place where it's all, a big business that deals with it. I never met the landlord, and it didn't matter if I met him or not. The landlord doesn't give a fuck about me. I don't give a fuck about the landlord, right? It doesn't matter if that person is a good guy, or in that case it's probably a bunch of investors, or a bunch of people around a table at the top of the building where I lived. I imagine that's how I imagine it. But it doesn't matter if they're good people or not. They're faceless, profiteers. It's even if they were really, really nice, it doesn't change the systemic implications of their role and of the way they're making money off of my necessity for. Yeah, Hawk coming in, flying in. I'm not building a house for other people I don't even know. You're gonna have to threaten me or bribe me, like they do in non-hypothetical communist societies. Yeah, this hyper individualism is the reason why we have uh, why we have homeless people, and we justify homeless people. Oh, those damn capitalists! This little family can't build a house, can't even afford a house. What? We're supposed to build houses as communities and help them out and make sure that most people are happy? No, 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 not on my territory. You know what? I'll build a house and then they'll have to pay me for it. And I'll profit off of it. And they'll do it because they need a house. And they'll be impoverished by it, but at least I'll be making money. And if they didn't want to be in that situation, they just had to be rich like me. And I'm pulling your leg, Hawk, a bit, but like the whole idea that you're gonna have to threaten me or bribe me to like build someone else's house, like this whole idea of threat and bribe, or whatever, like this idea of coercion, um, is so important to understanding landlordism, because people are coerced into being tenants, because most people systemically don't have the money to buy a house, and it's made that way. House prices have gone up. Most people can't afford a house. Most people my age, I'm 26, most people don't even think of being able to buy a house. And it's made that way so that you will be a tenant your whole life. That's coercion. It's not done through a gun. It's done through systemic. And that's why I want people to put their systemic little hats on. And that's the whole idea of property, right? The whole idea of private property, which is coercion in itself. One day we'll talk about private property, but there's coercive elements to it. The whole idea that, oh, well, if you don't like me as a landlord, or you don't like this, go somewhere else. It's like the somewhere else is either another landlord, buy my own house, which is not as we've established, not really an alternative for many people, or be homeless, right? Like, it's either like you're either a tenant or homeless for many people. Don't tell me that's freedom. Don't tell me that there's no coercion to that. It's you're paying someone else's mortgage, or you're on the street. But communism is the ones who are coercive, or communists are the coercive ones.